Today's class is a foundations flow where we'll go over some of the foundational movements that you can expect to see in my classes. I'll have some props with me to go over our triple S, which is our posture, and I'll go over a couple things on our body before we get started. So this is a pelvis. Your pelvis is a bowl. You want your pelvis to be upright when you're doing most movements. Tipping forward in the pelvis is when we stick the tailbone out, so tipping that bowl forward. A posterior tilt or tipping backwards is when you tuck the tailbone under. So to find that happy medium, we want that upright. So not arching the low back, not tucking it under, but finding that position where our pelvis is in neutral, our tailbone is reaching down toward the ground, and our pubic bone, which is the front of the pelvis, is lifting up and not tipping forward. Our triple S is our neutral posture. That's when the back of our skull is stacked over our shoulder blades, otherwise known as our scapula, and our scapula are stacked right on top of our sacrum, which is the back of the pelvis right above the tailbone. So when we're upright in that neutral posture, those three things are stacked. You can also check your triple S by putting some kind of stick or broom behind you and see if it would touch that triple S. So if you put a stick behind you, would it touch the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum? And that's a really great thing I recommend to do at some point. It can be really informative about how you're moving your body, and if you can do some simple movements like a hip hinge, keeping that nice stack of your triple S. Our pelvic points are at the front of our pelvis or front of our hips, so you might be able to feel them on yourself. They're just a little bony part at the front of our pelvis. So when we want that pelvic bowl to be upright, not tipping forward or tipping backwards, I might say draw those two pelvic points in. So our bones won't actually move, but the tissue between those bones is going to tighten and draw in. That's going to help us to keep our deep core muscles engaged, but get us into that upright position with the pelvic bowl. We'll be doing some movements that isolate the thoracic spine. So that's this chunk of the spine, kind of your middle and upper back. Your thorax is your rib cage. So just think about where your rib cage is. That's the part of the spine that we might be isolating in rotation or side bending. So that's just a helpful visual so that if I say rotate the thoracic spine, we're really just trying to move in this area of the spine. So not down below in the lumbar spine or the lower back, and not necessarily up in the cervical spine around the neck. So just this area around the rib cage. We'll start on our backs for bridge pose. So as you lie down on your back, let the feet be as far away from the body as you need in order to keep your sacrum down. So again, that's the back of the pelvis right above the tailbone. We don't want to have the low back lifted or arching. Now check if you can feel your shoulder blades on the mat and the back of your skull. So that's our triple S here. As we're lying down, we want to keep that spine as neutral as possible. Push down into the feet. We're going to use our glutes to lift the hips into a very low bridge pose. So stay really low in your bridge so that you can feel the back ribs still on the mat. So we're not lifting up so high that we're arching or compressing the lower part of the back. We want the low back to feel long. So as you push into the feet, feel your tailbone reach towards your heels. So we're going to keep a little bit of squeeze, but definitely some firmness in the glutes since we're extending the hips. Chin is slightly toward the throat, so the back of the neck is long. So this is our bridge pose. We do this in every class. Remember where those pelvic points are at the front of your pelvis. Here's the first time we're going to try to draw those two pelvic points in and see if you can feel that tightening in between those two pelvic points. Holding your bridge, reach your right palm up toward the ceiling. Take the left fingers and pull back into a wrist stretch. So when we're stretching the wrist in this way, the wrist is an extension. We do a lot of things in daily life where our wrist is in flexion. So that would be this type of position with the wrist. So we want to make sure that we're stretching out the wrist. You can switch hands, left palm up, pull back. Weight bearing is also wrist extension where our palms are flat on the ground. So we do want to prepare the wrist if we're going to be doing weight bearing, which we are in this class. Quadrupeds, plank poses, downward dog, anything where you're on your hands. So stretching out that left wrist. Let's bring the hands to the legs. Try to lower down as slowly as you can segmentally. So the highest part of the back, middle, lower, all the way until we get that sacrum down so that again, we have that triple S touching the mat. Hands are going to interlace behind the head. Draw your elbows way in as if your elbows could touch each other. We're going to take a deep breath into the ribs. As you exhale, draw your pelvic points in, pull your belly button down. Just try to lift off your shoulder blades. It's a tiny lift, so we're not doing a big sit-up or a crunch. We're just trying to lift off the shoulder blades. Chin is slightly towards your throat. Inhale to lower the head back down. Exhale, draw your pelvic points in, pull the belly button down, lift off the shoulder blades. Lean your head back into your hands. We don't want to be pulling on the neck to lift. So the hands are just there to support. Inhale to lower. Exhale, tiny lift off the shoulder blades. Draw your pelvic points in. Keep your low back on the ground. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up. So we're targeting our deep core here. Draw those pelvic points in. Imagine tightening a corset around your rib cage as you lift off the shoulder blades. Inhale to lower. Exhale, lift up. Lean your head back. Imagine that your belly button could pull down toward the ground. Inhale to lower. You can release your hands. We're going to come up into quadruped onto hands and knees. So this is our first weight-bearing position. Shoulders are right over the wrist, hips are over the knees. Lift the front of your throat up so that the head's not dropping down. We want that triple S in line here. So you could picture that broom or stick behind your back. You could also put a block, if you have one, on your lower back. So the back of the pelvis, that's the sacrum. Holding it here is going to tell us if we're moving in the pelvis, the low back, or holding that still. Right now we want to focus on our shoulder blades. So we'll push into the palms, try to spread your shoulder blades away from each other, but we're not rounding the whole back like a cat pose. We're just moving the shoulder blades. Now draw the chest down toward the ground a little bit, keeping the arms straight. Shoulder blades draw back in toward the spine. Try not to move anywhere else. Push into the hands, spread those shoulder blades apart. That's protracting the shoulder blades. Soften the chest down, draw those shoulder blades in. That's retracting the shoulder blades. So keep going, pushing into the hands. Now, if you have that block on your lower back and it's already fallen off or it's wiggling a lot, that means you're moving in the lower back as well. So right now, we're thinking about our spine staying nice and long. The only thing moving are the shoulder blades. So they spread away from each other and draw back in, pushing into the hands, making sure the head's not dropping down. Good. Find that happy medium in between protracting and retracting. So that's our neutral scapula when you find something in the middle. Let's keep our weight in the hands. If you have the block, you can remove it. We're going to head to a downward dog. Toes will tuck under. Your hip creases right where your thigh meets the hip is going to lift up nice and high, keeping the knees bent. Now, if your feet are way at the back of the mat, walk them in quite a bit. So we're going to shorten our stance, pressing into the roots of the fingers, lifting the hip creases up. So we want our pelvis neutral here, which is drawing those pelvic points in. Now check in with the chest and shoulders. We don't want to be sinking the chest down toward the ground. As you push into the fingers, lift your front ribs up. Now even think about lifting your armpits up, so away from the ground, to make sure we're staying really stable in the shoulders. Head will just release. You can pedal the feet out if that feels good. But feel free to keep the knees really bent anytime you're in downward dog. Heels do not have to touch the ground. We really want to focus on this almost triangle shape. The apex, or the highest part of our down dog, is the pelvis. Holding strong in the arms. Keep the knees soft. Hands will walk back toward the feet. Walk your hands up as high onto the legs as you need to keep the spine long. So our hip creases are moving back. We're pressing into the heels, big toes, and pinky toes. This is a triple flexion squat. Our ankles are flexed, our knees are flexed, and our hips are flexed. Push down into the feet. See if you can rise up without rounding your back. Now we're at the back of our mat. Let's check in with our posture here. So we have that triple S stacked. You could also check to make sure your ears are over your shoulders are over your pelvis. So that's a nice upright posture. Pick up your right foot. It doesn't matter how high it lifts. Push down into that left foot. This is flexing the right hip. Now step your right foot forward. Flex the left hip. Thigh lifts up toward the torso, but the spine doesn't change. Step it down. Flex your right hip. Push down into that left foot. Pelvis doesn't change. Spine doesn't change. Step it down. Let's do one more. Flex the left hip. Push down into that right foot. Step it down. Now we're at the top of our mat, hopefully with that same neutral posture. I'm going to use this golf club. You could use a broom or a stick, but grab something and place it behind you and just check in. You might not be able to feel the back of your head touching whatever's behind you. You might not be able to feel your shoulder blades, or maybe it's your lower back. So just take note of which area feels not close to the stick, and we're going to try some of those triple flexion squats. So almost like that happy squat, we'll hinge at our hips, which means hips move back, torso comes toward the thighs, our knees are bending as we hinge at the hips. Now see if you've lost that connection somewhere. Maybe it's your skull, your shoulder blades, or your sacrum. Push into the feet and rise up. Keep doing that. Hips move back, spine doesn't round. Try to keep connected to whatever's behind you. Pushing into the feet, hinging at the hips. So going back to that same triple flexion, ankles, knees, and hips. If you don't have a stick or something to put behind you, you're going to bring your hands to your thighs. Slide your hands down as far as you can go without rounding your back. Same thing, push down into the feet, rise up as you slide the hands back up. Check in with what your head and neck are doing. A lot of times we drop the head forward, and we're not really sure we're doing that. And then because we drop the head forward, we start to round the upper back. So really getting this movement of hinging at the hips. Spine is staying long. So if you look down and you see your knees going further forward than your toes, that means you're not flexing in your hips. You're just bending the knees. So our hips are moving way back. We're going to add on as you inhale, arms reach forward and up. Anytime your arms lift up, lift your shoulder blades up toward your ears. We want that upward lift in the scapula. Now, same triple flexion here. We just have our arms up. Hips move back, torso comes toward the thighs. Plant your hands down. We're heading into a quadruped, back to hands and knees. Shoulders line up over the wrist, hips over the knees. Make sure your ears don't drop below the shoulders. Let's protract and retract a couple times. Push into the palms, spread the shoulder blades apart, and then draw those shoulder blades in. So let's get back to that movement, isolating the shoulder blades. Just a few times, and then we'll find that neutral. So that happy medium between spreading apart and squeezing in, finding that neutral position. Now hold there. Don't let the shoulder blades change as you step the right foot back for plank, and then the left foot. So it's a really challenging but honest way to get into plank. So notice if you've really started to spread your shoulder blades apart, or you've let the pelvis sink down. So picture that broom behind your back here. Lower your knees. Keep lifting the front of the throat up so ears aren't dropping down. On an exhale, let's lower down. Try to keep the top of your shoulders lifted so that as we lower down, our shoulders haven't dropped forward. You can untuck the toes. Feel your two pelvic points draw in here, almost as if you could lift the low belly up. Tailbone is reaching toward the heels. Feel your palms drag backwards toward the back of the mat, opening the chest a little bit in a low cobra. So the movement isn't coming from throwing the head back or lifting the chin. The chin is staying neutral, and we're getting a little bit of thoracic extension. Tuck the toes under. We'll lift back into a quadruped. Right foot will step through, coming into a 90-90 lunge. Slide that left knee in, lift up, and we'll check in with our triple S. So you can put one hand behind your lower back, one hand behind the skull. Now really check that triple S. If you do have that broom or stick behind you, try it here. Put it behind your back. See if you can feel the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum touch the stick or the broom, the club, whatever you have. And we're going to tighten our left glute. So instead of sinking the pelvis forward here, our tailbone is reaching down. we're really active in that left glute. So the more we activate this left glute, the more we're going to feel an opening in the front of the hip. Good, let's remove the stick if you had it. Coming back into a quadruped, right leg will extend back into a three-legged quadruped. Float the leg up nice and low, keep the toes facing down. You can always use a block on your sacrum, the back of your pelvis. Lift your throat so the ears don't drop down. As you bend your right knee, we're going to pull the right thigh in toward the body any amount without rounding the back. That's flexing the hip. Now extend it back. Don't let your head drop down. Pull it in, flexing the right hip. Try not to move the shoulder blades or the lower back. Extend it back out. Hip extension, pull it in to flex it. Notice if you've rounded the shoulder blades or puffed up in the upper back. Extend it back. Lower to quadruped, we'll switch sides. Left foot steps through. Low lunge. Right hip is over that right knee. Let's tighten that right glute. Check in with the pelvic bowl. It's not tipping forward. We're not sinking the hips down. Our tailbone is reaching straight down. Pelvic points are drawing in. Hands can come to the back of the skull and the sacrum, or use that stick. Whatever you've got to place behind you, checking in to see if those three things are making contact with the stick. So again, this is a great little trick to do anytime. You can do this in almost any movement. It doesn't just have to be yoga. It doesn't have to be this low lunge. You can use it in so many ways to check in, get a little feedback on your posture. Good, let's lower the hands down. Quadruped. Left leg back. Now picture that happy medium for your shoulder blades. Lift the throat, float that left leg up, but keep it low. If it goes too high, we're gonna tip the pelvis forward or arch the back. So hold strong in the arms. As you bend the knee and pull it in, that's flexing the left hip. Doesn't matter how far it goes. Extend it back out. Left leg comes back behind you. Hold strong in the arms. Flex it. Pull it in without rounding the back. Extend it out. Draw those pelvic points in. Pull it in to flex it. Don't let the head drop. Extend it back. Lower to quadruped. Right foot will step through. Left toes will tuck under this time. Same type of 90-90 lunge. Ears over the shoulders, shoulders over the pelvis. Let's tighten that left glute. Arms reach up. We're going to focus on our shoulder blades here in our lunge. So remember where your shoulder blades are. Feel both shoulder blades glide up toward the ears like your arms are growing longer. And then try to pull those shoulder blades as far down the back as they'll go. Lifting the shoulder blades, lowering the shoulder blades. So when we lift the shoulder blades up, that's elevation. When we pull the shoulder blades down, that's depression. Keep going up and down. Try to keep your arms straight so that you don't confuse bending the elbows with moving the shoulder blades. Check in with that pelvis. Keep your tailbone reaching down, drawing those pelvic points in. So this is the natural movement we want when we reach our arms up, is to lift the shoulder blades along with it. Bring the hands back down under the shoulders. You can untuck the left toes. Right leg will come back again for three-legged quadruped. Bend your knee this time. If you've got a block, place it on your lower back so that we can try to isolate the right hip. Externally rotate the right hip. So your thigh bone is rotating to the right. Internally rotate. Thigh bone rotates back in toward the body or toward the left. Externally rotate. Internally rotate. Now if you have the block, that will tell you if you're moving and isolating just the hip. But if you've already lost the block or it's wiggling a lot, the whole pelvis is moving and not just that right hip. So that is another great little trick you can use to see if you can isolate the hip without moving the pelvis. Let's lower it down to quadruped. Remove the block if you have it. Left foot steps through. Right knee is down. Let's tuck the toes under. Low lunge. Picture that broom or stick behind you. Tighten the right glute. Arms up. Lift and lower the shoulder blades. Do this at any pace. See if you can isolate the shoulder blades without the ribs moving. So sometimes we lift the arms up and we pop the ribs forward. So lift and lower. If you feel like your ribs are really popping forward, reach the arms in front of you more instead of straight up. And that will help to get that up and down movement of the shoulder blades without involving the ribs. So when we're in that neutral posture, right now our shoulder blades are just gliding up and down the back of the rib cage. Check in with the pelvis. Keep drawing those pelvic points in. Hands down. Untuck the right toes, three-legged quadruped, left leg behind, and we'll bend the knee this time. Lift the front of the throat so the ears don't drop below the shoulders. Hold the pelvis still. So we're thinking about drawing those pelvic points in. Externally and internally rotate that left hip. So try to just move that left hip. Press evenly into both hands. Arms stay straight and strong. Every once in a while, check in with your shoulder blades. Have they started to spread away from each other, or can you keep that neutral position, that happy medium between spreading apart and squeezing in? Feeling that left hip move without the low back turning with it. Lower to quadruped, tuck the toes, keep the stance nice and short as you lift the pelvis up for downward dog. Feel free to pedal the feet out if that feels good. Holding strong in your arms, lifting those front ribs up. Feet are gonna walk forward this time into a bent knee forward fold. Bend your knees enough that the back doesn't need to round. Hands can come as high on the legs as you'd like. Just like that happy squat. Push down into your feet, arms reach forward and up. Lift both shoulder blades up like we did in low lunge. Release your hands down. Step your left foot back and bend that left knee coming into a high lunge. Check in with that pelvic bowl. We don't want it tipping forward or tucking under too much. So try to find, again, that happy medium between tilting or tipping forward and back, so nice and upright. We're gonna bring our fists together right out in front of us and work on some of that thoracic rotation. So before we rotate, I want you to picture headlights at those pelvic points, the front of your pelvis, facing straight forward, so that when we rotate above, those pelvic points are gonna stay forward. Our headlights aren't gonna turn with it. So we're just going to isolate that rib cage. So knuckles together, tighten this left glute. On an exhale, turn just the rib cage, just 1 or 2 inches to the right toward the front leg. So it's a small rotation, and bring it back. Exhale, rotate to the right, tighten that left glute, bring it back. Keep going. You can go at any pace, but check. Make sure those headlights are still facing forward. So we're trying not to rotate or turn in the lower back, just around the rib cage. Our core is working so that we can rotate up above without moving the lower body. Good. We're going to turn to the left, unwinding. Right knee stays bent for warrior 2. Now check in with that pelvic bowl here. Is it tipping forward? Is the tailbone sticking out behind you? Are you tucking under too much? So find that nice upright pelvic bowl. Reach the arms out. Bring your left hand to the left side of the ribs. We'll reverse it, right arm up and over. Now our left hand at the left side of the rib is there so that we don't sink too far down. We want to lift this left side of the rib cage up so that we can get more length or more of a stretch in the right side of the torso. Bring it back to your warrior 2. Right hand to the right side of the rib cage. Let's come into a warrior variation. So our right hand is here to make sure we don't sink down here, but we lift those right ribs up and away from that right thigh so that we can get that same stretch or pull on the left side of the torso. Come back up. Let's do that one more time. Left hand to the ribs. Reverse it without sinking. Left ear can come to the shoulder to release the neck. Warrior 2. Right hand to the ribs. Variation. Stay lifted away from that right thigh. Push down into that left foot. Give that left glute a little squeeze here. Back to warrior 2. We'll straighten the right knee, turn to the side of the mat. Side lunges. You can use that stick or broom if you have one. Check in with your triple S. So we want to move with that neutral spine, side lunge to the left. So our knee is going to bend, but our hip crease, right where the thigh meets the hip, is moving really far back, pushing into the heel, big toe, and pinky toe. Side lunge to the right. So if you have the stick behind you as we alternate, notice what tends to leave the stick or the broom first. Is it the head dropping down too low? Are we losing the connection with the back of the pelvis? Come back up. Let's step it back to the front of the mat. You can remove the stick for now. Right ball of the foot steps back, high lunge. So heading to the other side. Knuckles together. Keep those pelvic points or headlights facing straight forward. Just our rib cage rotates to the left as you exhale. Back to center. Go as slowly as you want, rotating to the left. And back to center. So as we rotate, keep that feeling of your two pelvic points drawing in, rotating in the rib cage. But we still have that triple S stack, so we're not rounding and rotating. We're not arching and rotating. That nice neutral spine is staying while we rotate around it. Keep firming that right glute. Let's unwind. Warrior two, left knee is bent, right leg is straight. Check in with that pelvic bowl. Are we tipping forward? Are we tipping backwards, tucking under? Draw your pelvic points in, arms reach out to the sides. This time we're going to bring our right hand to the left side of the rib cage as we reverse. Now think about lifting up into that right hand, so we're not reaching back really far. We're lifting up into the left side of the torso. Warrior two. Left hand to the right side of the rib cage. Warrior variation. Instead of trying to get really low toward the ground, lift up into that left hand. Warrior two. Let's do that one more time. Right hand to the left ribs. Reverse it. You can let the neck release, ear to the shoulder, pushing into the feet. Warrior two. Left hand to the right ribs. Variation. Let the neck release. Lift up into that left hand. Tighten the right glute. Warrior two. Turn to your right side of the mat, side lunges. So maybe we have one hand at the back of the pelvis, one hand at the back of the skull, side lunging at any pace. Lifting the front of the throat so the head doesn't drop down. Check those knees, make sure they're not moving forward over the toes. Instead, our knees are bending, but our hip creases are moving back. As far as you can go, torso comes toward the thighs, so we're flexing the hips here. If you have that broom or stick behind your back, notice what tends to leave the broom first. So what do you feel losing contact? Is it the head dropping too low away from the stick? Is it the lower back arching, so not being able to keep that pelvis neutral? Is it your shoulder blades? Are you rounding at the upper back and that's making it hard to touch the broom? So just check in with this great tool to move with that neutral spine. Come back up. Let's turn it back to the front of the mat. We're going to come onto our back, coming into a figure four. Lying down, checking that triple S. Pick up your right foot, externally rotate the hip, cross your right ankle over the left knee or thigh, pull your right toes back toward the shin so your right foot is in a flexed position. You can stay here. You can take your right hand and maybe gently push that right thigh away from the body to go deeper. You can pick up your left foot, pulling that left thigh in without using the hands to grab. Stretching the right hip, but keep that triple S down. Can you feel the back of your pelvis, the sacrum on the ground, your shoulder blades, and the back of your skull? Release it down and we'll switch. Make sure we haven't lifted that low back up. Pick up your left foot, so that's flexing the left hip, thigh comes toward the torso. Externally rotate the hip, let the heel cross over, finding your figure four. So if you can keep that triple S down, you can take the left hand to the thigh if that feels good. You can pick up the right foot without using the hands to stretch out that left hip. So just take any option. Check in with your breath. See if you can slow it down a little bit while we cool down. Release it down. You can end with your feet on the mat, knees bent. You can extend the legs out if that feels good. Let your arms rest either somewhere on your body or along your sides. Let your eyes close. Relaxing your forehead. Unclenching your jaw. Stay here as long as you'd like.